Morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to NSBCon Dallas 2015. Woohoo! That only works in North America. You go to Europe, you're like, woohoo, and they're like, crickets. Nobody knows woohoo over in Europe. Anyway, so welcome. For those of you who don't know me, you're probably in the wrong place. My name is Udi Dahan, founder of InServiceBus. Now I run the company, particular software that is producing this wonderful event and continues developing InServiceBus. This is our third NSBCon. We had two last year, one in London, one in New York. And this year we've decided to just go big and do one per year. So we decided to come to Texas, which is the place where big things happen. Can I get another woohoo? That's how they do it in Texas. So we've been up to a lot of things, but it may not have looked that way for those of you out in the environment. So giving you an idea of kind of how things have been running, use a metaphor of the duck, the lowly duck. Calm and composed on the surface, everything's cool and calm and collected, but underneath, we're paddling like hell. We've really been working hard this past year, making sure that all of the things that you expect to just work actually do just work for you. And every time there's the smallest indication that there might be a problem, we storm that thing and we fix it right away. So just to give you a little bit of stats of what's been going on, we've had 15 minor releases since the beginning of 2015. So that's more than one a month. And, for most of you, kind of like, oh, okay, well, didn't even realize that was going on. Most of those releases are not InServiceBus itself. The way that we've set up InServiceBus is that we've got this collection of highly componentized pieces. So, for example, Microsoft released a new version of their Unity container, version 4. Anybody using Unity? Yeah, okay. So they put out Unity 4. Okay, so we did a minor release of our adapter in order to support Unity 4. That was one of those 15 releases that we put out there. RabbitMQ, anybody using RabbitMQ? Yeah? So RabbitMQ put out a minor version of their client library, which of course was a breaking change. They don't follow SemVer for whatever reason. So we put out a new minor version of our adapter in order to support that new version of RabbitMQ. So a lot of those changes might not even have been applicable to you, but from our perspective, just making sure that we keep on track of all of the little changes, of all of the dependencies that we support, to make sure that everything, as I said before, just works for you. Now, in addition to those 15 minor releases, we had 40 patch releases. So again, from the perspective of what's been going on average over the year, talking about roughly one release per week. And lots of little things that you probably haven't even noticed. That's the whole paddling like hell underneath type thing. Making sure that by the time that you hear about something, it's already been fixed, it's already been resolved. And I hope some of you have had that experience that you kind of ask a question, say, hey, I've had an issue with something. We're like, oh yeah, we have a release for that. That's 5.2.9 or InServiceBus.RabbitMQ.2.2.3 and all those types of things that they're ready and prepared for you whenever you need them. So that's a lot of what's been going on behind the scenes. Ultimately, what we've been trying to do is to improve the stability, security, and usability of the platform this past year. Just making sure all the I's are dotted, all of the T's are crossed. A lot of the things, again, they're small things, and it kind of makes it difficult. To be honest with you guys, we're developers just like you. We don't know how to do big, fancy marketing type of things. I mean, this is our attempt to do big, fancy marketing. But it's not like, we've had these discussions internally. Shouldn't we have some big whiz-bang feature that we could talk about and get everybody excited about? And yeah, we would love to do that. We'd like to kind of pull back the veil and go, ta-da, and have everybody clap and applaud and say how wonderful we are. But I'll be honest with you guys, we're infrastructure. It's kind of hard to be cool when you're infrastructure. The whole thing about infrastructure, it's supposed to be boring. It's supposed to be so reliable, you don't even notice that it's there. So anytime that we kind of do a ta-da, and there's often this, oh, is that all? It just works even more than it just worked before. It kind of has this. We're not like it's not mobile and slick, and you can kind of pan and zoom and do all sorts of cool visual stuff. And we try. We've got our monitoring stuff that I'll have a slide on that. But realistically, we realize that what draws you to us is that element of so reliable it's boring. And I think that in many ways in our industry, that's something that we want more of. That we don't like being surprised when core pieces of infrastructure that are supposed to just work end up not working and failing in all sorts of weird ways. So that's really what we've been focusing on for this past year, and what we will be continuing to focus on, making sure all of those different pieces work. So one of the differences that we've been trying to apply for ourselves is just communicating with all of you a little bit better. In the past, when we had, say, a critical bug fix, we put out a blog post saying, hey, we've got a critical bug fix. And is anybody subscribed to the NService Bus blog? Anybody know that there's an NService Bus blog? Some of you do. We also have a Twitter account where you can, every time we put something out, it's on there. But one of the things that we've really tried to do this past year, and it's been something of a change for us internally, because as developers, we're really focused on shipping software. That's what we're good at. That's what we like to do. And this whole element about communicating with other people, I mean, you know what that's like. We're great at talking to computers, talking to other people. Yeah, I mean, that's why we're a distributed company. It's so awesome being a distributed company, because if somebody annoys you, you can just close the video conference. Just a little red X, and the annoyance is gone. There's nobody that kind of peeks over your cubicle. Hi, I sent you an email 5 minutes ago. Did you get that? Right? We don't have any of that. So it's really nice as a distributed company, we can kind of keep each other at arm's length. But in talking with all of you, we realized we needed to do better. And specifically around our critical bug fixes, one of the changes that we've done this year, and I hope that you haven't needed to notice it, but it's one of those things that when you need it, hopefully it will be there for you, that every time we put out a critical bug fix, we have this element of how to know if you're affected. Now, sometimes it's as simple as if you're using a specific type of adapter. Are you on RabbitMQ 3.2? You're affected. In other cases, it was kind of more of a background type deal of well, this might have affected you. And one of the things that we started to do this past year is we started, as a part of our release announcements, to give you scripts that you can run on top of our platform to say, run this script. It will give you back a list of message IDs that may have been affected by this. So run this script. If you get back a list of IDs, contact us and we'll help you through that. We've tried to get better at that element of how do you know if your production system was affected by it? So anytime you're in production and we have something that we think might have affected your system, we try to go that extra mile to help you figure out via all these types of scripts which specific messages were hit and then what you can do about them. So instead of just shipping software, we try to get better at thinking through, well, what would you have to do if you read this announcement about your production system? And from the little bit of feedback that we've heard so far, it's really helped people that were in a bind in a production scenario to get out of that. So a lot of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, it's really just making sure that anything that you're going to experience, we've already figured out and that we can help you resolve. Now, I mentioned on the monitoring side of things that we've made some improvements. There are lots of little usability improvements here and there. Again, it's none of the magic big bang features, but one of the things that we've been doing is introducing error grouping for your monitoring environment. So every once in a while you have this element, you come in the morning and there are 50,000 messages that have failed. And if it's the first time it's ever happened to you, there's this, oh my God moment of, okay, that many things have failed. What we've done recently with the latest version of Service Pulse is we've started grouping them based on the exception details. So it could very well be that just a database outage or a web service outage or something like that is what caused all of the failures. So grouping those things up hopefully will help. It's probably not so much you, but people more in a DevOps or administrative role know what is the source of the problem and have the ability to retry those groups piece by piece rather than either retrying everything or retrying on a one-by-one basis. So often it's little things like that that just through our conversations with all of you, we hear, oh, okay, that would make your life a little bit better. That would be a little bit less annoying. So if there are more things like that, again, whether it's from an ops perspective or from a development perspective, that would make things just a little bit smoother for you, let us know. We really just want to make sure that all of those little annoyances are out of the way, even while we're working on the bigger stuff. So some of the bigger stuff that's been going on, and here's the part where there's a certain amount of mea culpa. Last year, for those of you who were at NSPCon, you might have heard about this thing called Service Matrix. It's something we've been working on for some time. So now I'm sad to say Service Matrix is, to use Microsoft language, it's not dead, it's done. Which is a fancy way of saying it's dead. Now, why? And again, this mea culpa, this is specifically me. This is Udi screwed up. This is not the company screwed up. This is something that I thought we could actually do. I thought that we could pull off a draggy, droppy type of design to runtime experience. And like so many other smart people before me, whether it was Don Box at Microsoft when they were running their Oslo project that was going to be the whole distributed systems design and runtime thing, or the guys at Rational Software from IBM that were doing it a generation earlier, it turns out you can solve about 80 to 90% of this problem pretty well. And like so many other things, the last 10% is just about impossible. And in interacting with people who were trying to build systems using Service Matrix, the problem was you just like to control your code, right? This is your code. It's not our code. And the problem was Service Matrix kept trying to make your code be our code. And it's really hard to have 100 people in a room all agree on how code should be organized. So you've probably had that on your project, just 5 developers on team. How should we organize our projects? 3 weeks later, we still haven't agreed. So trying to do something that's going to work for everybody, we failed at that. And what we've tried to do as a result of that is kind of revert back to basic principles. Well, what was important? What was helpful about this? And one of the big things that we heard from people in looking at Service Matrix said, we really like that we have this living, breathing documentation that shows us how our system works. The problem with Service Matrix was, unless you built your system with it from the very beginning, you couldn't get a picture that looked like that. And that, the number one feature request that we had for Service Matrix is, can you make this work for my existing code base? Not because I like to drag and drop, but just because I want to be able to see how my system works. What are the messages? What are the endpoints? How do they flow between each other? That would be really useful for me. So we started saying, okay, well, let's put the code generation fancy bits to one side for a second and see, could we actually build something like that? And what we've done right now, it's at a prototype proof of concept phase. I don't want to come up and say that we have the solution for everything that Service Matrix did for you in the past. But the main thing that we've done is we've pivoted this around your audit. So all of the messages that flow through your system go into this service control backend, for those of you who've been using a fairly recent version of InService Bus. And in there, in essence, we pull that into a database. Now, what we've done is we've created a visualization on top of all of the information in your audit store. So we have via headers, which message went from which endpoint to which other endpoint. Was that an event? Was that a command? Was it published? Was it subscribed to? And in essence, this visualization allows everybody to get this sort of service matrixy diagram of how their system works, again, whether that's a production environment or a test environment or your dev box, without having to build your system from the very beginning according to these templates. So ultimately, however you organize your code, whether you have message projects as a shared DLL that everything references, or whether you use shared source files, or whether you just use JSON schema, whatever solution you have for organizing your messages, not going to be a problem here. Are you going to have one endpoint per project? Are you going to have multiple endpoints per Visual Studio project? Not going to be a problem. Ultimately, it comes back to just how you name your endpoints and what are the messages that are flowing between them. So hopefully this will give you, if not the whole service matrix living documentation experience, it should probably get you 70 to 80% of the way there tomorrow, rather than a let's rebuild our entire system with service matrix. So if you want to try this out, we've got this GitHub repository called Particular Labs. So you have the link over there. It's called Routing Visualization. And ultimately, everybody can just plug that in, and there's the information on there, how you get this talking to your audit store, and start visualizing what you've got. Again, this is currently at a prototype state. We don't want to make the same mistake that we did with Service Matrix of prematurely productizing something and saying, we know best how this is going to be. We want to give you access to the earliest bits about what's been going on and to hear your feedback. What's working for you, what's not working for you. Is it just too difficult to read when you have 100 different message types that are on there? The number of endpoints that you have on there, how it gets laid out. So please do give us feedback. We've already been running some tests, I think, with probably 10 to 20 customers on this type of Particular Labs routing visualization thing. And we've tried it a bunch of different ways. We're kind of happy with what we've got so far, but we'd really like to take this to the next level and get a whole lot more information from the rest of you. So please, start playing with this. And most important thing ultimately is it's not going to mess with your code. All right, so you can use this on any existing code base, on any existing system, and there's no risk. So please do let us know what you think about it, and whether you like it, whether you want more of that, what else is missing from the Service Matrix experience. But ultimately, we hope that this is going to make the promise of Service Matrix quite a bit more accessible to everybody that has existing code in production, rather than being the how do you design a new system from scratch experience. That's a separate problem that we're going to be figuring out how to address going forwards. Another thing that we talked about last year was this sequence diagram feature for Service Insight. We now have this in private beta. You should expect to see a public beta coming out very shortly. We've been trying this a bunch of different ways. The challenge with something like a sequence diagram as opposed to this sort of picture, this picture is static, whereas the sequence diagram is ultimately for a specific message flow, how did everything end up playing out? And one of the things that we've seen when actually working with customers on their flows is that ultimately you have message A, which causes message B, which causes message C, and then that publishes an event, and then you have subscribers, and then they do a bunch of other things. So the more use that people have of In-Service Bus, the bigger these sequence diagrams become, and we've really tried to figure out what's the best way of laying them out so that you can see as much as possible without being ultimately losing the important details. So expect to see this coming out very soon. We have this tested and we're really quite happy with it. Whereas last year was kind of like this, hey, we've got the sequence diagram idea and it's going to be coming out really soon. Here we are a year later and say, it's still really soon. That just shows you that developers are not very good with estimates. Especially when those developers have to support and deal with lots of existing customers and make sure that all of the production pieces are working very well. So now when I say very soon, I mean like this coming week type of soon. The bits are already shippable. Now, some of the other things I want to talk to you about is conversations that we've had customers about upgrades. So One of the things that we've spent a great deal of time on this past year is just working with customers through their upgrades. Is anybody still on version 3 of In-Service Bus in production? Yeah, some hands? So we've put together some upgrade guides for you. So just go to our doc site and type in upgrade guides. There is a comprehensive upgrade guide for going from version 3 to version 4. And incidentally, always, if you're going to be doing an upgrade, between one major version to the next one. Don't go skipping steps. So you'll have lots and lots of documentation about how to take that first step. Who's still on version 4? Yes? Okay, so we've got yet another big comprehensive guide for you going from version 4 to version 5. A lot of this stuff has been built through our interactions with customers of well, I tried this and that bit wasn't documented. So you should really have lots of step-by-step information about how to deal with all of the detailed information. Please do look through that before starting an upgrade process. Not to say that the upgrades are, you should expect them to be difficult or time-consuming. We've really invested a lot in making sure that anytime you do an upgrade, the compiler is going to be leading you to okay, this thing has been obsoleted, go look at this documentation to tell you how to change your code in order to migrate that piece of it. So it is very much exception, it's not really exception, but compiler warning driven upgrades. So you can do that on an endpoint by endpoint basis, right? So some of the things that we've heard about from people is this element of, but if I'm gonna upgrade, I'm gonna have to upgrade everything and that's a huge risk. You don't have to do that. You can have part of your system on version 3 of In-Service Bus and another part of your system on version 4. They will talk to each other just fine. So you don't have to do a big, gigantic migration. You can pick one endpoint, preferably a low-risk one, do an upgrade on that one, see that everything is working, release that to production, and then go build a whole bunch of new features for the business. The problem that we've heard from a lot of developers is, the business doesn't really want to stop delivering features while we're doing an upgrade. They don't really see a whole lot of value in that. So you can do this type of gradual cascading endpoint by endpoint upgrade process. And that will keep the risk very low. It's backwards compatible on the wire and at a data level, so you won't have issues with, say, one endpoint that's running a saga and another endpoint that's running the exact same saga that are trying to talk to each other. As long as you don't make changes to your code, version 3 to version 4, version 4 to version 5, we're not going to be making changes to the data models. So you can really just endpoint by endpoint upgrade bits and pieces of your system. And anytime you run into problems, you're going to see in the upgrade guide a solution for that. Now, the big thing that's coming is In-Service Bus version 6. Now, version 6 is probably the biggest, most ambitious change that we've made to In-Service Bus ever. The big change, really, just to kind of summarize it up for you, is the whole async thing. So you might have heard that Microsoft introduced async await some time ago. And some people on ADSD course in the past have asked me, Udi, what do you think about async await? I said, it's a train wreck waiting to happen. And I gotta tell you, the trains are piling up. It's just, one piece of infrastructure after another. It starts with Microsoft and their APIs just making everything async. And the problem is if you start mixing sync and async code, really bad things start happening to your code base. And I see people nodding, it's like, yeah. And the thing is one of those elements, like, I knew it was going to happen, because ultimately it's all of the bad things about multi-threading and concurrency all wrapped up in a single keyword. It's like, what could possibly go wrong, right? So the issue with async is that ultimately Microsoft is taking all of their infrastructure and moving that to be async. And that means that anybody that's building on top of it is going to need to be moving to an async model as well, as did we. In essence, the hard part is that because we kind of sit in between Microsoft infrastructure and RabbitMQ infrastructure and a whole bunch of other third-party infrastructure, making sure that all of those async bits line up exactly the right way has been really difficult. And some of the challenges are for those of you who have gone through the process of doing any async work, is that it looks like it works. That's the dangerous, but you don't get, it's really hard to write a repeatedly failing unit test that indicates, okay, yeah, something's broken. So we've been investing a lot in really going bit by bit through almost every single API and interface that makes up in-service bus, and taking those and migrating them to be async and stabilizing. So we have a lot more changes than we originally planned when we were starting down in-service bus v6. But beyond just the async stuff, there is some nifty other bits that I want to talk about I'll kind of paint a bigger picture of what's going on. But I don't want to spill all the beans because we have other presenters to give you the details. So the biggest thing that is different this time around is we've started working on the upgrade guide now. And we didn't wait till we actually released it to say, okay, how are people going to upgrade? We started writing the documentation of how are you going to upgrade from version 5 to version 6 as we're building version 6. So that when v6 comes out, you will have a 20-page long manual of all of the little things to keep in mind when you're doing an upgrade. The biggest thing for you, as Daniel's going to be talking about later on, is to really look at how you change your code, how you change your handler code. It's not just about migrating the in-service bus bits, but how do you take your code that might have been synchronous and make that async going forwards. So you're going to get a whole lot more information on that, about what's coming with v6 and how to prepare for it in a little bit. One of the other things that we've done with v6 that I think is pretty neat is this multiple deserialization thing. Now, what I've noticed in talking to customers over the years is somebody built a system with in-service bus vx, and that was using XML serialization. And somebody else later on built another system that was using JSON serialization. And now they're working on a system that needs to talk to both of these. And there's this element of, okay, so which do we pick? XML serialization, JSON serialization, or something else? Now in v5, we created the infrastructure that could allow you to solve that problem yourself by plugging into the pipeline. In v6, now that's available out of the box. So you'll be able to have a single endpoint speaking multiple serialization formats and being able to get events via XML from one system, getting events via JSON from another system, and speaking protocol buffers for all you care. And to have all of that work fairly seamlessly. The way that we do that is ultimately by piggybacking a little bit more metadata via the headers to let us know where things are coming from, where they're going to, which language they're speaking. The direction that we're moving in, and again, this is sort of one part of it, is to get all of the little integration bits and to have more and more of that solved for you out of the box. So you have to write less and less boilerplate, transform one structure into another structure and back again type of code. We also have done some interesting proof of concept work about doing that at a transport level. So today, for example, if you want to listen on MSMQ and talk RabbitMQ, or you're getting something locally off of MSMQ and you want to talk to something in the cloud, right now you need to do a little bit more boilerplate code. In the future, I'm not talking about when v6 comes out, but part of our longer term vision is just to make all of that transport bridging stuff just work for you seamlessly. So all of the little integration challenges, this is on-premise, that's in the cloud, this is using this serialization, that's using that serialization, to have the infrastructure just figure all that stuff out for you and make it work transparently. And with the tooling that we talked about before, so you can always see at runtime how things are working. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that is being stacked up for the future. I'm not talking about like a 3-year vision type of thing, but things that we're working on today. The main thing that I want you to keep in mind of when you're hearing about, say, in-service bus v6 and things like that, we don't use version numbers for marketing purposes. We didn't release something as v6 or v5 because we're saying, oh, this is a big change, let's do a conference about it. We do it because we follow SEMVer fairly strictly. we want to make sure that if there's any type of breaking change that's happening, that gets isolated from all of the other changes that we're doing, so that you can do the lowest risk upgrade of your system as possible. And that's why oftentimes you'll see that we end up releasing fairly significant features not as a part of a major release. So if you're seeing V6, like, oh, what are all the amazing things that are coming in version 6? Most of the things you're going to be seeing are going to be released as a 6.1 or a 6.2 rather than a 6.0. Usually what we try to do is we try to isolate the breaking change part of it from the new feature part of it, so that you can ultimately isolate the changes that you're working through and ultimately decide, well, at which point of this version train do you want to get involved. So I know you have those conversations with your business stakeholders. Well, what are we going to get out of version 6? The biggest part of it is async. And for some of you, that might not be a big deal. If you're out in the cloud, it might actually be a huge deal. We're going to hear more about that. But just keep in mind, the reason we put out major versions is because there was a change that we had to do that we couldn't do in a backwards compatible way. Our main thing, as I said before about infrastructure, we want to be boring. We want everything to be backwards compatible and just work for you seamlessly. Sometimes we can't do that. Sometimes there needs to be a breaking change. V6 will not be a wire level breaking change. You're going to have V6 endpoints that can talk to V5 endpoints, and that's just fine. But for example, you won't be able to mix V6 code and V5 code in the same endpoint. That's why we're talking about it as a breaking change. So, what are we going to be seeing through NSBCon this year? Primarily focused on what are you going to be seeing today, give you a sense of what's coming, and give you a little bit of an outline of what's going on tomorrow. So the biggest thing that we have coming up, as I said, V6, Daniel's going to be giving you a lot of the insight into the nitty-gritty of all of the things that we've been doing with V6, how that's going to affect your code, how you migrate that code, what problems you might be having, and actually walk you through some scenarios of the before and after of your code. A lot of the differences as a result of that is just going to be that code that you might have had before is going to be able to run quite a bit faster and with lower resource utilization as a result of this type of model, specifically for those of you that are on the cloud. I'm curious, who's on the cloud these days, or a cloud? There's no the that's out there. And for those of you that are thinking about going to the cloud, this is going to be a fairly big deal. We're going to get a whole lot more detailed information, why that's significant, how that helps you out in the cloud environment as we go forward. Next presentation that we're going to have after that one is talking about the front-end parts of your system. So last year I talked about SignalR integration within Service Bus, so we're going to have a presentation talking about how actually you use these two technologies together. There have been some early blog posts around people that have been integrating the two of them together. I really think that we're getting to a time where the web front end part of the world has moved to the point that users now expect a type of reactive event-driven experience rather than click next, click next, click next for everything. SignalR has been around long enough, it's stable, and Service Bus has been around long enough, it's stable. So we're going to be hearing about how you integrate these two things together in an actual experience report about somebody that did that and worked through all of the details. It's one of those things that I think it's about time to move from the, oh, that's a cool, nifty thing, maybe someday in the future, to, well, I think now's the time to actually start doing this at a large scale and really take this event-driven philosophy, instead of having it just be infrastructure that's event-driven or code that's event-driven, and actually take that to the level of event-driven business processes and event-driven user experiences. So we're going to be hearing quite a bit more about that. After that, we are going to have the Akka.net guys coming and talk to us. You might have heard about Akka.net or the actor model. For those of you who haven't, and this is going to be your first time hearing about it, I think it's a very interesting philosophy that people that are building message-driven asynchronous systems should become aware of. There's a lot of interesting things that are going on philosophically and architecturally that I think that a lot of people in this audience are now ready for. It's much more difficult to come to somebody who's always been doing N-tier synchronous end-to-end and get them thinking in terms of actors. But for those of you that have been in our workshops, and I think most of you have, in the Saga Masterclass, you've gotten this idea of what it's like to build sagas and to have these type of stateful, event-driven type of objects. Actors are very much like that. And you can build some very interesting things using Akka.NET that you wouldn't necessarily use a saga for, but philosophically, they're actually quite similar to each other. So again, Akka.NET, cool new open source project that's been running for quite some time. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't heard of it, now is a great time to start looking at it. That's not to say go into production with it tomorrow, but it's one of those things that I think that at least people in this community should be aware of and have it start influencing how you think about software. The other big change that we have coming with version 6 of In-Service Bus is that you're not going to be needing the distributor anymore. Has anybody used the distributor in In-Service Bus? Okay, a bunch of you. Now, distributor, as you know, is that thing in the middle that kind of directs traffic and says, okay, now you go, okay, no, now you wait. So what we've done is we found a way to do more asynchronous and concurrent distribution of messages without having a single physical distributor in the middle. So ultimately, we're taking the distributor functionality and distributing it. Ultimately, it's kind of one of those things that's obvious in retrospect. Yeah, if you're building a distributed system, everything should be distributed, including the thing that actually distributes the load. So we're going to be seeing how that actually works, what changes that means for your code base, how you'd configure something like that. And from what we've seen so far, the differences in scale are really quite significant. So for those of you that are looking at sort of exponentially growing message throughput in your systems, this is going to be a very big deal and allow you to go and take In-Service Bus to much higher levels in terms of throughput than what you've had before. So expect to see a little bit more on that. I think that's going to be after lunch. Another thing that we're going to be talking about is how to decompose your domain. One of the things that comes to certain realization for people building In-Service Bus-based systems is, okay, we've sort of done version 1 of the system. We realized that we divided everything wrong. Now it's time to do version 2 and to redivide things up again. So we're going to be hearing from one of our customers that has gone through that exact same process, speaking to what were the mistakes that were made, how to change that, how to gradually migrate from the wrong way to the right way. How do you find what are the right ways of dividing things up? I know a bunch of you have taken my Advanced Distributed Systems Design course before. It's one of those things you're kind of sitting there saying, okay, yeah, I think I get it. And then you go back to work and you try to do it on your project. And you're like, oh, no, I don't get it. You try doing it and said, okay, no, that's not it. So it can be challenging trying this out. So we're going to be hearing what that's like from one of the people that have done it and where they were successful and what you can take away from that. After that, we're going to be having a panel discussion. So we're going to be talking about most of the common interesting trends that you've been hearing about, that can include microservices and CQRS and actor model. And if you have questions that you'd like the panel to address, please do. Part of it is for us to talk about things that are top of mind for you. I know that microservices is kind of one of the big industry buzzwords. We'll be spending a bunch of time on that. But if you do have questions, that's a great point in time to bring them up. And then we're going to wrap up the day with a hackathon. Now, this hackathon is going to be a little bit different than others. Has anybody been to a hackathon before? Okay, some of you. For those of you that haven't, what we're going to be doing is not scary. It's not complex. Ultimately, it's going to be a fun, lighthearted way of playing with a lot of the things that you might have experienced yesterday in the workshop. So we're going to have a nice short type of experience of working together. When we get to the hackathon, I'll give you more details about what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're going to track it. But ultimately, as developers, we don't like to have a whole day go by in just meetings. So this is going to be our way of ending the day with some fun coding and playing with some of the new stuff that you might have heard about today and or yesterday. Give you a little bit of idea of what's coming tomorrow. I have Ted Neward speaking about platform-oriented development. What is platform-oriented development? Ultimately, it's getting to that model of understanding that when we build software, ultimately we need to maintain and grow with it over long periods of time. And that requires a change in mentality around how we structure our code, how we think about the code, how we organize in teams. So Ted's going to be giving us a little bit of insight into what that's like when you do that at large scale. Andreas is going to be talking to us about transports. One of the big things that people ask in, say, their second or third project is, okay, we've done MSMQ, now we want to go do something else. Should we do RabbitMQ? Should we do SQL transport? If we need to go to the cloud, should we be using Azure Service Bus? Should we be using Azure Storage Queues? What do we use, where, when, why, and how? So Andreas is going to be going through all of those details about what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of the transports. Where would you want to use which ones? Because that ends up being a question that a lot of people are struggling with. Then we're going to be hearing from Jonathan Matheos, one of our partners who's been building a multi-tenant software as a service system on top of InService Bus. So anybody in the SaaS space, there have been lessons around some of the challenges around multi-tenancy within Service Bus. We heard some of them in NSPCon London last year. It's been a year and a half since then. I think there's time to hear more about that as more and more SaaS-based systems get built and rolled out. So things to keep in mind, bits and pieces that you might need to plug into InService Bus to get it to work. All important pieces around building these types of systems. Jimmy Bogard's going to be speaking to us about using InService Bus to bridge legacy systems, talking more about the integration stuff that I mentioned before, and how to get it to work today, even before the bright new future with InService Bus v6 comes to pass. We're going to have Danny Fafach talking to us about ultimately how do you alert and monitor around an InService Bus-based system. The great thing about message-driven systems is they tend to recover automatically. What do you do when they don't? It's not just about looking at a dashboard like Service Pulse. There's a whole lot more that you can do and you can plug into our infrastructure. So we're going to hear more about that. We have Kajana Woodard is going to be talking to us about the top mistakes that people make when they're building InService Bus systems. Hopefully you won't recognize too many of them. But at least the ones that you do recognize, there will be, and this is how you solve those problems. Then the last topic of tomorrow is going to be David Boyke talking about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, in particular, how we organize our code, how we do releases. It was one of those things that, as we've grown this past year, and many developers have come on board, they kind of look at how we do things and like, wow, that's crazy complex. But we make it work. So give you some idea about what we do behind the scenes to be able to release 50 releases per year and to have that just continue chugging along in a high quality type of way. And hopefully you'll be able to take away some of the patterns that we're using internally, whether that's around our continuous build and continuous deploy, that you can apply to your systems today. And after that, we have a unconference planned for you on the last day. Now, my guess is that a bunch of you haven't been at unconferences before. Unconferences are a kind of open space type of conference, which ultimately is taking the best part of a conference, which invariably ends up being the hallway conversations. It says, you know what if we had a whole conference that was just hallway conversations? How would we structure something like that? So if you've never been to an unconference before, it can kind of be difficult to get an idea of what something like that would look like. But ultimately, it's taking all of the really high-value peer-to-peer type interactions that you have at a conference and maxing that out. So on the last day, I'm going to give you some structure. How are we going to run this unconference? If you've never been to one, this is your first experience, I think you're going to be in for a treat. And potentially you might be going away from that saying, I wish all conferences were unconferences from now on. And we've had that experience before. But for our first time, we think a single day is going to give you a really good experience about what that's like. And that's going to give you the opportunity to also get all of the questions that might have popped up in the last 2 days of the conference to surface up and say, how do I handle this? I'm struggling with that. To interact with the speakers in a less kind of frontal audience type of model and more kind of sitting around the table and discussing and asking questions type of model. I think you're really going to enjoy that. And that will be the NSBCon experience. So I'm perfectly on time, which is unusual for me. I tend to speak way too much. So at this point in time, I'd like to, from all of us here in particular, some of them that are actually here physically and some that are virtually with us, thank you all for coming and tell you to have a great NSBCon. And that's all. Let's get started. Now, one final word before I send you all off. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be asking you for feedback about the sessions. There are bowls in the back over there. So there are going to be green, yellow, and red little pieces of paper. So if you enjoyed a session and you liked it, put a green piece of paper in the bowls. If it was kind of like, yeah, it's okay, but not great, put a yellow one in there. If you really didn't like it, put a red piece of paper in there. That helps us get a better idea about which parts of NSBCon you liked, which parts you didn't, so that next year we can have an even better experience for all of you. So thank you very much. There's coffee, tea, and stuff out there for you to eat. See you back in 15 minutes.